I'm talking about the aircraft carrier, the Enterprise, or the Big E as it was known. Hello everybody, my name is Alex and welcome to another installment of the Civ 6 Scenario Concept Series. That's a mouthful. In today's installment, which is the third episode, we are going to talk about one of my favourite bits of history ever. This is pretty much the first history I ever watched, and it got me into the subject, so it's pretty cool. We are talking about the World War II battle in the Pacific, focusing on America versus Japan. The way we are going to do this is to first of all look at a bit of the context behind this scenario, so what kind of thing is it based on, what happened in real life. Then we're going to talk about how the scenario should work and a few of the core mechanics. And then finally, my favourite bit, because it allows me to be a little bit creative, is to look at some additional mechanics, look at how the game could work in detail, some of the unique units. So that's always my favourite bit. By the way, thank you to everybody who voted in the last poll to make this the topic of this video. Also, make sure you vote in the next one. I will be putting that up simultaneously as this video is uploaded. So if there is a suggestion you want to see on there, please do make sure you vote for it. And like this, because if you keep liking these videos, there's a good chance I will keep making more beyond the first batch of 5. So first up, let's talk about the context. Now, for the most part, like I said, I am focusing on America versus Japan and the World War II battle in the Pacific. Now, I know lots of other countries were involved, at least in part, like the British, the Dutch, Australians. There were so many other countries involved, but I'm just going to focus on America versus Japan for this video. So with that in mind, as we all know, this conflict between the two nations really kicked off after Pearl Harbor in 1941. Basically, Japan needed to attack America because they wanted to knock America out of any war very quickly, so they struck at the heart of the Pacific Fleet, caused lots of carnage, sunk a few ships, lots of American sailors were lost, and that is what brought America properly into the Second World War, and certainly into the battle in the Pacific. Now, although I'm not proposing this is directly used in the scenario, although 1941 and December 1941 was the real key date in this, before that point, Japan and America had been heading for a war, it could be said. America and its allies did not like the fact Japan was building an empire in Southeast Asia, they did not like what they were doing in Manchuria, so they stopped trading oil with them, and Japan to continue to build an empire needed oil. As a result of this, for Japan to continue its imperial ambitions and to really build that base in Southeast Asia, they needed to capture territories such as the Dutch East Indies, and if they invaded the Dutch East Indies, the Americans would get involved. They had troops stationed in the Philippines, so Japan thought America's going to get involved anyway sooner or later. Let's hit them hard, let's hit them quick and try and knock them out of any war very, very quickly. And that's how all this started. So beyond Pearl Harbor, what happened was the two nations battled it out with a number of spectacular and very famous naval battles. Midway, for example, very famous, and also after America gained the upper hand in the war after the first sort of 6 months, a year, they embarked on an island hopping campaign. Now the island hopping campaign, it's very famous because America jumped from island to island in the Pacific, and Japanese resistance was ferocious. They did not like giving up any ground. It was a Japanese mentality at this point that it was better to die in battle than surrender. So these battles became some of the most horrific we have ever seen through history. As we all know, eventually the United States and the Allies won the war against the Axis powers, and it ended in the Pacific when America dropped the atomic bombs, first on Hiroshima and then on Nagasaki, showing just how horrific war can be. So now I've given you an incredibly simplified history of the battle in the Pacific. I urge you to go and find out more if you are interested. Let's talk about some of the core basics should this become a scenario in Civ 6. So first up, what territories should this include? Well, for me, the scenario should include territory, obviously all the islands in the Pacific, but I think on those islands such as Iwo Jima, they would need to be bigger than they are in real life because it just doesn't seem to make sense to fight over one single tile. So maybe they'd have to expand them above proportion should this become a scenario. Other bits of territory I would like to see, maybe the American West Coast, probably the northern coast of Australia, the Japanese home islands, and lots of territory in Southeast Asia, you know, the Philippines, Indonesia, all that stuff. So I'd like to see an awful lot of that involved if the scenario was to happen. As for a time period, I would love to see it start in December 1941. Now, I had some thinking, should it start before 1941? I decided not. I think it should start with the Japanese forces prepared to invade or attack the Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor. This would leave anybody playing as Japan with an interesting situation. Do you just strike at the heart of the American Navy? Do you strike at the battleships, cruisers in Pearl Harbor? Or do you go searching for those carriers that were not in port? Because if you could knock out the carriers, you have a much better chance of winning the war. Another thing to mention at this start date is that Japanese forces, the Navy and military, should be prepared to launch invasions into the Dutch East Indies, should be prepared to launch invasions into the Philippines, and maybe you could even carry into Australia if you'd like. But that is the kind of start situation I am looking at. Now, obviously, you'd have to play out the whole scenario year by year, turn by turn, but how could you win this? Well, for Japan, it's quite simple. Destroy American morale, sink enough ships, inflict enough defeats on the Americans that they no longer want to be in the war and they retreat, allowing Japan to basically go and expand its influence in Southeast Asia. For America, it's relatively simple as well. Push Japan back to the home islands, then one way or another, whether it's with the atomic bombs or not, or with an invasion, maybe just a land invasion of the home islands, push Japan out of the war, force them to surrender. Now, before we jump into my favourite bit of these videos, which is the extra detail and the new mechanic sort of stuff, I just want to remind you to answer today's comments question, and that is, how would you like to see a World War II Pacific scenario work in Civilization 6? Let me know literally anything about it. When should it begin? What units should there be? All that good stuff. Let me know in the comments and I will be sure to get back to you. Another thing I'm going to be doing as well is giving sneak peeks to future episodes over on Twitter first. It won't be very long, but it will just give you an idea of the kind of things we are going to talk about. So go and follow me over on there. I'll leave links in the description and stuff. So if you want to see the next episode, or a little bit of the next episode very early, then make sure you follow me over on there. So as the final point to this video, I want to talk about some of the additional stuff. So firstly, this scenario should include iconic naval weapons. I'm talking about the aircraft carrier, the Enterprise, or the Big E as it was known, or the gigantic Japanese battleship Yamato. I think it would be really cool to use those in a scenario. I would love that. The second thing is that both nations should start with a navy which is proportionate to what they had in real life. This is important and unique because I do not think there should be the forming of fleets and armadas. I would very much like to see each unit remain individual, so just kind of put them all together in a big fleet but don't form them into a fleet, if that makes sense. The next thing I want to mention is the Naval Ships Customizer. I've talked about this before lots of times. Basically, you can decide the armament and armor and everything about new ships that you build. It's just kind of a customizer thing. Bigger, more powerful ships cost more, heavier ships are slower, all that good stuff. But I really want to see that added somewhere in Civ 6, so maybe they could do it here. Another idea I had was the expanded theatres of war. Now, this is kind of a confusing one to explain, but do you remember when I said make islands like Iwo Jima or maybe Pearl Harbor even bigger than they were in real life? One way of doing this would be to have a separate theatre of war for it. So like they do in the Total War games with battles, basically you send all your troops there and then you enter a different theatre, enter a different screen where it's kind of a big map of Iwo Jima and then you can have a proper campaign. The final thing I want to mention is a Manhattan Project dynamic. Now, as I said earlier, what brought this war to an end was the use of atomic bombs, and that project was known as the Manhattan Project. I think that as America especially, you should be able to plow additional resources into the atomic bomb project. Obviously, if you get atomic bombs, you have a much better chance of forcing Japan out of the war. But if you plow too many resources into the Manhattan Project and not enough into building new ships, Japan might just beat you before you get there, so it would add a new dynamic, and I definitely think it's something which is historically accurate and also would be quite interesting to weigh up as you play as the United States of America. Thank you so much for watching this video today. If you want to see another video from ourselves, check out the American Revolution concept in the box below. Also make sure that you like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on Twitter for that sneak peek, and answer the comments question. Thank you once again. My name is Alex, and I will see you in another video soon.